This week we're going to be covering the concepts of standard input, standard outputs, and standard error, as well as working with pipes and redirects. So without further ado, let me bring up my agenda here. So first, we're going to discuss the concepts of standard input, standard output, and standard error. Like I said, it's very common to see it referenced like this. You'll start to understand these as interrupt codes later on once you become more advanced in Linux. These are the numerical values that are associated with standard input, standard output, and standard error. We're also going to be discussing the pipe symbol, which is right above the enter key, so you have to shift it, and it's going to be right above the enter key. It's pretty much a perpendicular line. The input redirect is the same thing as the less than symbol, and the output redirect is the same thing as the greater than symbol. So if you're going to do an output redirect and append, it's going to be two greater than symbols next to each other. And without further ado, we'll kind of keep this in mind. You might want to pause it here and write this down. But for now, I'm going to minimize it, and I'll give you a second. Now let's play with some of these concepts. When I type something in on the keyboard, I'm using standard input. Standard input is the keyboard. It is possible to redirect that to a file and have file be your input. So, in other words, if I wanted to send a message to a file, I could put it in something like this. So let's say I wanted to echo, or I wanted to, let's say I wanted to sort. Now let me get a file here first. Let me create a file. Call it test.txt. Bob, Sally, Jane, John, Fred, Alex. There, so we have a list of names. Now, if I were to sort this, I could redirect that test list into the sort, and you can see that it would sort it in alphabetical order. So if I were to just type that a regular sort, I would have Bob. I might have this order a little bit different, but it's the same concept. Fred, John, Sally, Alice, Alice, and Jane. We'll keep it the same. It looks like I had a typo in there. So right now, it's expecting this list to go on and on and on. As we've said, everything in Linux is a file. So at this point, I will do a control and the letter D, which is the end file marker. And you can see once I did that, it did go ahead and sort everything. So that's the concept of standard input. So it can be from the keyboard, or it can be, you can redirect standard input to come from a file. The value of standard input is always going to be 0. So when we reference it, it's referenced by a 0. If I wanted to list a file, or let's list a directory here. Actually, I don't think there's that much. Let's create a couple junk files here. Whoops. So there, I got a couple of files now. I could definitely sort this list if I had to. So let's say I do an ls and I want to redirect that to a file. This is a basic output redirect here. And I'm going to do that to test, we'll call it test3. So now I have a test3 file. You can see this one actually has some size to it where I did the listing. So at this point, if I wanted to sort and I wanted to put in the test3 data, test3 data, it's going to give it to me in what it sees as alphabetical order. So that's using input redirection, and we're also using output redirection when we create the file. So now let's say we want to discuss the other concepts of standard error, standard output. If I type in ls and I type in ttr, there is no file called ttr, yet I still get output. So is this standard output or is this standard error? Let's find out. If I do a regular ls, I'm going to get the files in the directory. And if I do this and type in ls, it says no such file or directory. It looks like an error, but we don't really know. We assume it is. I can tell it's an error. It sounds like an error. It looks like an error. I've typed something like this many, many times. So I know that that file didn't exist. I know that's an error, but let's prove it. So what we're going to do right now is we'll try doing an ls, and we'll type TRRE, which we know isn't there. This time we're going to put a 2 in front of it, and we're going to send that output to test5. And I'm going to put some spacing here just to make it look better. So if I do that right there, whoops, you know what? I couldn't have had this, the space wasn't allowed right there. So now if I do that, I've created test5. Let's see what's in it. There's your error right there. So it did capture it. So we know that standard error came out as the number 2 there. So let's change this to a 1. So we should get standard output here. So what happens when we do this and we redirect it to the test5 file? Look at this. The error gets written to the screen, and it doesn't, not like here where it just went right to another prompt. So what's in test5 now? Let's take a look at the file here. Test5 is empty. So in this case, we had no standard output. We only had standard error. Is it possible to have both? Absolutely. But let's reverse this scenario here with this test5 file. So let's do this. Let's do an ls, and we'll type a 1 here, and we'll send the output to test5. All right. So is this a valid command? Should everything work here? Let's hit enter and find out. We got a prompt. We didn't get anything that said it was an error. So no error output went to the screen. There's nothing at all that went to the screen actually, because we took standard output and we redirected it. So let's prove that. So there you go. There's your file listing right there, just like we put in with test5. So now let's try it the other way. So we didn't see any standard error go to the screen, so will we see any go to the file? No, but we do get standard output. And if we look here, we can see test5 is now empty. If I were to cat that, there'd be nothing at all in it. So that's the concepts of standard output and standard error, and we can use this quite a bit throughout our work. A lot of times when you're writing cron jobs and scripts, you get errors. You don't necessarily want to see those errors. You don't necessarily care. So let's try something like this where we'll do an ls t star, oops, that's a capital T, t star and g star. So there shouldn't be anything that would match the g star criteria. So here we get our error, and we get our standard output. Okay, so now we want the standard output. The error we might not necessarily want to see. So let's get rid of it here. And like we've always said, everything in Linux is a file, including nothing. So you might have heard me talk about dev null. We're going to use it right now. So let's do this. So let's do our ls command again. And this time we're going to take 2, which is standard error. We're going to redirect that to /dev, which is the devices, and null, which is nothing. So if I do that right there, you'll see that I get the listing of just the files, but the error has gone away because I've dissed it, basically. I've redirected it to nothing. So let's take a look now at this same situation if we wanted to write it to an actual file. So this time we'll call it test6. All right, we just got our same standard output there. And if we do a listing, you can see there's some file size. So it did write the error output to test6. So that is the concepts of file redirection. The one other thing we haven't gone over is the output append. So right now I am going to cat test6 because it's the last thing we've done here. Okay, and there's your error message. So we know that that's in there. So now let's say we want to write this is an error, let's say. So let's echo it to it. So we type echo, this is an error. And we're going to redirect that to test6. So if we do that, it came back to the prompt, no messages. So let's take a look at test6 now. Yeah, it says this is an error. That's what we sent to it. But now let's talk about the idea of output, redirect, and append. So let's first of all recreate our test6 right there. Okay, and you can see it included test6 in its list, but there still is no G, so we should be good. So now, if we cat test6, we've got our error message in it again. But let's say we want to take this message here, okay? And when you're redirecting error output, it doesn't have to be from a specific command or anything. It can be anything. I've been using ls with this example, but this time we're using an echo command. But let's change the character. So we've got greater than, which, as we saw from our listing, that's the output, redirect, and append symbol. So let's see what that does. So now I hit enter here. Doesn't look like anything bad happened. So let's take a look and see what we get. It looks like the file size has grown a little bit, doesn't it? Whoops. And now you can see we have our listing and we have our message. So we haven't erased the file and overwritten it with the output. We've taken the output redirect and we've appended the file. And that's the concepts of file redirection. The other thing we need to talk about is the pipe, which is where we take the input from one command and we put it into the other command. So, for example, so let's look at test.txt again, maybe. And you can see how I've gone around the directory. This is good review here. So now we have an unsorted list of names. So let's do that one. So we could do a sort test.txt, and it's going to put this all in order because the sort command is expecting something, a file name, to be passed in by parameter. If we were to do it with the man page, which we know is help on sort, we would see that it's looking for a specific set of flags first. It's also looking for a specific file. So that is something it's going to check for, as we can see. However, if we were to do something like this, if we were to do a cat test.txt, we were to pipe it to sort, sort is still going to be getting the input. However, it's going to seem a little bit different to it here. So what I just did, it sorted it in order the same way it did in this step above. However, what we essentially did here is we did something like this where I will mimic the situation. So right here is the unsorted list. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to grab this and I'm going to collect it. Now, if I type sort, I just get a blank prompt. So if I paste these names in and then I put the end of file marker in, like I said, the redirect symbol, the pipe symbol takes the output from one command and puts it into the other. It doesn't pass it along the command line. That's the point that I need to make clear there. So when you're doing a PS command, or if you're trying to grep something, if I type grep, it's going to not know what to do with it. So I can, however, do a ps-ef. I can pipe the output from this pf command into grep, and I can grep for something. And it doesn't find anything. However, when I do this ps-ef and I pipe the output of grep, it's taking the output of the PS and it's grepping through it. So it's actually getting the grep on itself, which sort of illustrates the point I'm trying to make. So whenever you're trying to grep a process and you do a simple grep like that, it's always going to show the grep command because it's applying one command's output as the other's input. Okay, so going on a little bit further here, I wanted to give you a couple other options here. One thing we've done a few times is we've done our ls, where we've taken our standard output, let's say, and we've redirected it to a file. This time I'm going to call it test7. Okay, and then I'm going to cat test7, and it's going to give me my directory listing. Another way we can do this is, the one is the default, it's assumed, and in many cases it's, as we'll see in a minute, it's necessary not to use this. So if we take this out and we just redirect it, we're going to get the same output. So that's really a good piece of information. And by the same token, if I do an ls t star and then the g star that we're used to here, and I keep it like this, you're still going to get the standard error to the screen, and test7 is still going to have all the standard outputs. So the one in there makes it look clear, but it's not necessary to have that. I also wanted to go into detail a little bit on pipes. With pipes, you can use many different pipes in one command line. So in other words, you can take the output from one command and pipe it into another, and from that you can pipe it into another and another and another, as long as that's necessary. So for example, we have our first file that we created here, test.txt. It's got the name listing in it, okay? So let's do cat.txt again. We'll pipe it into a sort, okay? So there, now it goes ahead and sorts it for you. So now from that, we'll pipe on, and let's say we'll grep out anything with the letter A in it. So now that breaks it down even further. So we're taking the output from this command and we're piping it into this command, and then we're taking that output and we're piping it into this. And we can go on and on and on like that. So if there was something else I wanted to grep out of here, let's say I wanted to grep out the letter Y. So now we only have Sally. So you can keep on piping output from one command to the other, to the other, to the other. That's an important concept to understand. Another thing I wanted to show you, and this is really something that gets used a lot when scheduling cron jobs. You don't want standard output and you don't want standard error being created when a cron job is running. When a cron job is running, that standard output has to go somewhere, and it's a scheduled process that usually doesn't have a terminal where its output gets sent to. So you end up getting it emailed to you. And as a system administrator, that can be really annoying. So I'm not going to go into detail. I am going to provide a link in the description of the video, which is from Ubuntu itself. It's got a really good list of redirection symbols that are available to you. But at this last concept I want to discuss is a type of reference to standard output. This is commonly used when we write cron jobs. It's never a good idea to have any kind of output, whether it be standard error or standard output, be sent to a console of any kind or any kind of screen output. A scheduler such as cron will not understand where to send that, therefore it will mail it. And as a system administrator, those emails can get really, really old. So you either want to redirect all output to a file, or you want to redirect all output to nothing at all, which in Linux that is a file as well. So let's demonstrate that here. So let's, oh, I'm in my class folder. So let's do an ls. There's files there. So what we would do is we would redirect. We could type the 1 to show standard output, or we don't need to. We're going to redirect the output to dev no, and then we are going to take standard error and we're going to redirect that to the reference. Oops, that's not the reference, to the reference of standard out or standard output. So let's try that and see what happens. So if I hit enter, we get nothing at all. But we know this ls works. We know that there's no standard error here. So let's do something with it where we know there's an error. So we'll go back to our standby test. We'll list T star and G star. So now we should get some kind of an error. But again, we get no output at all. And the way we're doing that is we're redirecting to dev no, and then we're taking the error output and we're redirecting that to the reference of standard out. So let's try that again, but instead of discarding it completely with dev no, let's actually write it to a file. So let's write it to test8.txt. All right, still no errors there, did we? But let's take a look at test8 and see what we get. So we get standard out and we get our sorted listing. Everything works there. So that's a good way to understand this. I told you